The tablecloth was ivory, heavy damask, that pooled to the floor in thick, deliberate folds, and Nadia had exactly 3 seconds to decide whether it would save her life. She made the decision the way she made every decision in the past 4 years, without thinking, without breathing, by pure survival instinct. She dropped to her knees on the cold marble floor, lifted the edge of the cloth, and pulled herself beneath the table just as the dining room doors opened behind her. The marble was ice against her palms. She pressed herself flat, tucking her knees to her chest, making herself as small as she had learned to make herself whenever Marcus walked into a room. It was a skill she had refined the way other women refined recipes or piano scales. Smaller, quieter, less, invisible if possible. Invisible was always safest. Above her, through the heavy weave of the damask, she heard footsteps. Not Marcus's footsteps, she would have recognized those anywhere. That particular weight of a man who walked like every floor owed him something. These footsteps were different. Measured, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had nowhere to be and knew it, and was comfortable with that fact in a way Marcus had never been comfortable with anything in his life. A chair scraped across marble. Then, silence. Nadia held her breath. She had not meant to end up in this room. She had not meant to end up in this house, this sprawling stone estate north of the city that Marcus had spoken of only in whispers, as though the name itself required caution. The Corvus estate. She had heard it mentioned 3 times in 4 years of marriage, once when Marcus was drunk and frightened, once when he was on the phone in his office with the door almost but not quite closed, and once, the worst time, when he had looked at her across their kitchen table with that particular expression he wore before things became very bad. Do you know what they do to people who disappoint them, Nadia? Do you have any idea what they are? She had not known then. She knew a little more now, though she wished she did not. What she knew was this: Marcus owed them money. A great deal of money. The kind of debt that did not come with payment plans, or grace periods, or sympathetic bank managers. And when Marcus could not pay, he had apparently decided that the most elegant solution was to offer something else. Someone else. She had found the document 3 days ago, folded inside the lining of his jacket while she was taking clothes to the dry cleaner. Her own name, written in the formal script of a contract she did not fully understand, beneath a seal she did not recognize. Her date of birth. Her physical description, and at the bottom, Marcus's signature, written with the confident flourish of a man who had long since stopped thinking of his wife as a person. She had taken the document. She had not told Marcus she had taken it. She had gone through the next 3 days of their life together, with the paper pressed inside her bra, close to her heart, while she figured out what to do. And then tonight, Marcus had told her to dress well because they were attending a dinner. He had said it with the particular lightness in his voice that meant the decision had already been made, that her response was not required, that she would get into the car and she would sit beside him and she would smile at whatever was waiting at the end of the drive. So she had dressed. And she had smiled. And she had sat beside him in the car for 45 minutes, while the city dissolved into darkness, and the darkness dissolved into something older, and she had thought, very clearly, that she was not going to do this. She had not known what she was going to do instead. The answer, apparently, was this: hiding under a table in a room she had slipped into when the butler's back was turned, while somewhere in this vast stone house, Marcus was presumably looking for her, explaining to his hosts that his wife had gotten lost, laughing the specific laugh he used when he was frightened, and trying not to show it. She understood that laugh. She had studied it the way you studied weather patterns when you lived somewhere prone to storms. The person in the chair above her had not moved. Nadia became aware, slowly, that this was strange. A person sits down at a table generally with some purpose: to eat, to read, to rest. The person above her had done none of these things. She could hear no sounds of movement, no silverware against china, no turning of pages, just the slight, almost imperceptible sound of breathing, steady and unhurried as a clock. And the smell, she noticed it the way you noticed things when all your other senses had shut down from fear, when smell and hearing took over, because you could not use your eyes. It was not cologne, though there was something expensive in it, something old, in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with depth. Like stone and cold water, and somewhere beneath it, the faint iron trace of something she could not name. Her knees were beginning to ache. She was afraid to shift. Outside the dining room, she heard something that made her stomach turn to water. Marcus's voice, sharp and thin with controlled panic, moving through the corridors of the house. She could not make out the words, but she did not need to. She had heard that voice in every register it was capable of producing, and this one meant he was close, and looking, and not finding her. And the gap between not finding and finding was narrowing by the minute. Her hands were flat against the cold marble. The tablecloth moved slightly in the draft from the heating vents, lifting just enough to let in a sliver of amber light from the candelabras. In that sliver of light, she saw the shoes of the person sitting above her. Black leather. Handmade, she thought, though she was not sure how she knew that. And perfectly still, the way only someone who was not at all concerned about stillness could be still, not the rigid stillness of someone forcing themselves to stay quiet, but the absolute natural stillness of a creature for whom movement was a choice rather than a default. The chair did not move. Nadia pressed her back against the table leg and waited. Marcus's voice grew louder in the corridor, and then it stopped, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. She knew that silence. It was the silence of a door opening, of a conversation beginning that she was not present for, but would feel the consequences of regardless. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool table leg and breathed through her nose, carefully, the way she had learned to breathe in the early years of the marriage, when breathing too loudly had its own consequences. Above her, the person in the chair still had not moved. This was becoming impossible to explain to herself as coincidence. A person who sat down at a dinner table in an empty room made no attempt to eat or read or do anything at all. And 3 minutes later was still sitting in the same position with the same quality of absolute stillness. That person either did not know she was there, or they did know, and were not reacting. And the reason for that non-reaction was something she could not calculate with the information available to her. She heard Marcus again, closer now, his voice threading through the crack beneath the dining room door with that particular pitch that meant he was being charming to someone he was afraid of. She could always tell the difference between Marcus's genuine charm and his functional charm. The genuine variety was warmer, lazier, built on an assumption that the world found him naturally appealing. The functional kind was a tool. Precise, slightly too smooth, calibrated to whatever he thought the other person wanted to hear. He was using the functional kind now. The dining room door opened. Nadia went absolutely rigid. Light flooded under the tablecloth. 2 sets of shoes appeared at the threshold, Marcus's Italian leather Oxfords, which she would have recognized blindfolded, and beside them, another pair. Older, a woman, from the shape of the heel. Moving with the kind of fluid precision that suggested age had done nothing to diminish her. My lord, the woman's voice was low and even, with an accent that seemed to have collected fragments from multiple centuries and multiple continents without settling on any of them. I apologize for the interruption. Our guest seems to have misplaced his wife. The person in the chair above Nadia finally moved, not much, just the slight shift of someone turning their head. When he spoke, his voice landed in the room the way certain sounds land, not loudly, but with a weight that made all other noise step back and wait. Has he? It was not a question. Marcus laughed his functional laugh. You know how it is. New place, she's not used to the layout. I'm sure she just stepped into the wrong room. If you don't mind, I'd like to she is not in the wrong room. Another not question. Nadia's heart was hammering so hard she was certain both of them could hear it, and then she thought, with a cold clarity that surprised her, that the man above her almost certainly could. She did not know how she knew this. She knew it the way you knew certain things in dreams, as information that arrived without needing to be learned. Marcus's shoes stopped moving. A pause. When he spoke again, the functional charm had developed a hairline crack. I'm sorry? The woman's shoes turned slightly, and Nadia had the distinct impression of someone trying to manage a situation that had already begun moving in its own direction. My lord, perhaps Victor. The single name, spoken with complete quiet. The woman's shoes went still. Marcus's shoes went still. The entire room went still in a way that rooms did not generally go still, as if the house itself had been paying attention and had now decided to listen. You brought a guest into my home. The voice above Nadia continued, still quiet, still even, still carrying that quality of absolute unhurriedness to fulfill a contract that you apparently believe gives you ownership of another person's life. He paused. I am curious what made you think this was acceptable. Marcus's voice was doing something Nadia had never heard it do before. It was shrinking, not in volume, but in substance, as though the confidence that usually inflated it was seeping away through the floor. With respect, the arrangement was agreed upon. The contract was it agreed upon by her. Silence. Show me her signature, Marcus. Show me where she agreed. Nadia closed her eyes. She was shaking, and she had not realized it, until this moment, her shoulders trembling with the effort of containing everything that was trying to get out the terror, yes, but also something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like the first sob of relief she had not allowed herself in 4 years. She did not make a sound. The tablecloth stirred again as the heating vent breathed, and in the amber sliver of light, she watched Marcus's shoes take one step into the room and then stop, as though he had encountered something invisible and impassable at that distance. She is my wife, Marcus said, and his voice had gone flat and careful in the way it went flat, and careful when he had decided that charm was not working and something else might be required. Under the law, I have the right to you or in my home, the voice said. Not in a courthouse, not in a solicitor's office. In my home, at my table, on my land. Here, the only law that applies is mine. The pause that followed was long enough that Nadia counted her own heartbeats. 11, 12, then Marcus's shoes turned. She watched them walk back to the doorway, pause, and stop. We will discuss this, Marcus said. His voice had found a new register, entirely soft, almost gentle, in the way that soft and gentle from Marcus always meant something that was the opposite of soft and gentle. We will discuss this tomorrow, when heads are clearer. My head, the voice above her said, is perfectly clear. It has been clear for some time. Yours is the only one that appears to require recovery. The dining room door closed. The woman's shoes remained for a moment, then moved quietly out through what must have been a secondary exit. Nadia had not heard it open or close. Then, silence. The person above her had not moved from the chair. She pressed her knees tighter to her chest, pressed her back harder against the table leg, and waited for him to speak, or leave, or do any of the 1,000 things that could happen next. She waited for the calculation, the thing he would want from her now that Marcus was gone. The price of whatever had just happened in this room. Because in her experience, nothing was ever simply given without something being required in return. The candles burned. The heating vent breathed. The chair did not move. She did not know how long she stayed there. Long enough that the cold of the marble had moved past discomfort into something that simply was, the way chronic pain eventually stops announcing itself and becomes the baseline. long enough that her heartbeat had slowed from its frantic hammering to something steadier, though not calm. She was not calm. She was simply exhausted from the effort of being frightened, and exhaustion sometimes looked like calm from the outside. The man above her had still not moved. This was, by any reasonable measurement, the strangest thing that had happened in an evening that had contained several strong contenders for that title. A man sat at the head of his own dinner table, in his own house, while a woman he had never met was hiding underneath it, and he did not demand that she come out. He did not summon servants. He did not speak, or leave, or in any way indicate that the situation was unusual or required resolution. He simply sat. She began to form a picture of him from the available evidence, the way you formed pictures of things you could not see. His shoes. His voice, the particular quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of patience. Patience implied waiting for something, implying want, and this did not feel like want. It felt more like permanence, like a cliff face, like something that had been in this position for long enough that position was no longer a choice, but a condition. He was old, she thought. Not old the way Marcus was old. Marcus was 52, and carried every year of it in the weight of his entitlement. This was a different kind of old. She could not have explained why she was certain of it. She was certain of it anyway. The document she had found in Marcus's jacket was still pressed against her skin, warm now from her body heat. She thought about what it said, and what it meant, and what Marcus had apparently decided her life was worth in the currency of his debts. She had read it 4 times, and each time the cold had gone a little deeper and settled a little more permanently into her chest, which was where she kept things that she was not yet ready to think about fully. She was aware that she would need to think about them eventually, just not from under a dinner table. She shifted carefully, trying to relieve the pressure on her left knee, and made the smallest sound, barely a breath, barely a movement of cloth against marble. The person above her spoke. "You can come out," he said. "I am not going to make you." She went still again. Her heart had begun its quick drumming. "I am aware that you are there," he continued. "I was aware when you came in. I have been aware for approximately 40 minutes, which means you have been on cold marble for 40 minutes, and I would like to state, for the record, that this was not my intention when I sat down." Nadia said nothing. She could not, yet, have explained why. "My intention," he said, his voice carrying the same quality it had when he addressed Marcus, unhurried, slightly dry, with a precision that suggested he chose his words not because they were the most impressive available, but because they were the most accurate. "My intention was to eat dinner. The evening has taken a detour." A very small silence. He continued, "Your husband is currently in the east parlor with my senior attendant, who is explaining to him that the arrangement he came here to finalize is not going to proceed. She is doing this with more diplomacy than the situation warrants. I would have used fewer words." Nadia found her voice. It came out quieter than she intended, flattened by the tablecloth. "What would you have said?" "I would have told him no." She thought about that. 3 years ago, before she had fully understood what she had married, she had tried to say no to Marcus herself about something smaller than this, something she could no longer even remember the specifics of, and had spent 2 days afterward understanding what it meant that she had. She had stopped saying no a long time before tonight. "He does not accept no easily," she said. "Few people who have never had it said to them do." A brief pause. "Come out from under my table," he said. Not as a command. She had heard commands from men for 4 years, and she knew the texture of them. It was closer to an observation that reached its logical end. Your knees will be better for it. She considered this. She considered that Marcus was somewhere in this house, and that the man above her had just told Marcus, in the most precise terms she had ever heard anyone use, that the arrangement was not proceeding. She considered that she had no money, no plan, and no idea how to get home from a house she had never seen before tonight. She reached up, found the edge of the tablecloth, and lifted it. The dining room was exactly as she had pictured it from below amber light. Long table, silver candelabras, burning in complete stillness. And at the head of the table, the man she had only seen as shoes and heard as a voice. She looked at him. He looked at her. He was younger looking than she had expected, and older than she could measure, which was a contradiction she filed away with all the other things she did not have the processing capacity for tonight. His features were the kind that belonged in the stone portraits of cathedrals, all clean lines and settled gravity, as though the world had been pushing against them for a very long time and had given up. His eyes were the color of pewter, or deep water, or the sky just after the last light went out. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on Marcus's face, or on the faces of men like Marcus. It was not calculation. It was not appraisal. It was something quieter than both, the expression of someone who was simply looking, and was willing to keep looking until they understood what they were looking at. She was still half under the table. She pulled herself out fully, sat back on her heels. Then, because sitting on the floor in front of someone felt like the wrong way to have this conversation, she stood, pulled one of the chairs out from the table, and sat down in it. She looked at him again. He had not moved. "My name is Nadia," she said. "I know," he replied. Nadia Voss. Born in Prague, raised in London from age 11, 31 years old. He paused. "You have a bruise on your left wrist that is approximately 4 days old." She instinctively pulled her sleeve down. His gaze did not move. "I am not going to ask how it happened," he said. "I already know how it happened. I simply want you to know that I noticed it." Nadia sat with that for a moment. "Why?" she said. "Why didn't you say anything?" "When I was under the table, you could have said something immediately." His hands were flat on the table, still and steady. "Because you were frightened," he said simply, "and frightened people need time before they need answers." He met her gaze. "I had the time." His name, she learned, was Aldrich Corvus. She learned this, not from him directly, but from the woman who came into the dining room 20 minutes later, the same measured shoes, the same contained movement, carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea that she set between them without comment, as though tea between a vampire king and a woman who had just crawled out from under his dinner table was an entirely ordinary occurrence. The woman's name was Sarah. She was ancient in the same way Aldrich was ancient. It was not a quality you saw so much as felt, like barometric pressure. The awareness of tremendous depth beneath a calm surface. She had white hair worn in an intricate braid, and eyes the color of pale winter light, and the overall impression of someone who had seen everything at least twice, and had decided to find most of it mildly interesting. "Your husband is in the East Wing," Sarah said. "He is not comfortable, but he is not in danger." She looked at Nadia with an expression that was professional and not unkind. "He is asking to speak with you." Nadia curled her fingers around the teacup. The warmth was extraordinary. She had not realized until this moment that she was cold through and through, marble cold. The cold of someone who had been frightened for a long time in a poorly heated place. "What happens if I say no?" "That is your right," Sarah said. Nadia nodded. "Then, no." Sarah accepted this without reaction, and withdrew to the periphery of the room in the way she had, giving the impression of having left without actually leaving. Aldrich had not touched his tea. He was watching her with that same quality of attention she could not quite categorize, the kind that did not reach or push but simply was. She had the feeling that if she sat here for an hour saying nothing, he would sit for an hour in response, and the hour would not trouble him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He waited. "Why did you let him come? If you knew what he was bringing, What the arrangement was, why let him through your gates at all? Aldrich was quiet for a moment, and she had the impression that the question was not surprising to him, but that he was choosing the precise answer rather than the approximate one. Because, he said, I needed to see what he would do, whether the document your husband sent was representative of his intentions, or whether it was a negotiating position. A way of opening a conversation. He looked at her steadily. It was not a negotiating position. No, Nadia said. It wasn't. She thought about the document. Her name at the top. Her description in the cold language of inventory. She thought about standing in the dry cleaners with her hand inside the jacket lining, and the moment the paper had touched her fingers, the way the world had reshuffled itself around that contact into something she did not recognize. She had not told anyone. She had not had anyone to tell. You have the document, Aldrich said. It was not a question. She looked up at him. Yes, he nodded once, as though a small piece of something had confirmed itself. May I see it? She considered this. The document was still pressed against her, warm and terrible. She thought about the seal at the bottom, the one she hadn't recognized. She reached inside the neckline of her dress and drew out the folded paper, smoothed it on the table, and pushed it toward him. He read it without touching it, leaning forward only slightly, his eyes moving across the page with a careful thoroughness. She watched his expression. It did not change. Which she was beginning to understand was not absence of feeling, but precision of containment feeling that was present but managed, channeled into specific forms rather than allowed to surface in whatever shape it chose. When he had finished reading, he leaned back. His eyes came back to her face. This seal, he said, tapping the bottom of the document without touching it. Do you know what it is? She shook her head. It is very old, he said. Older than the legal frameworks your husband believes give this document its validity. It is the seal of a compact that existed for centuries between certain families, and certain his expression shifted slightly. The first real movement in his face, she had seen entities. An arrangement of obligation and service that was formally dissolved 140 years ago. He looked at her. Your husband appears not to know this, or to have chosen not to know it. So the document is worthless, he said. Legally, historically, in every sense. It does not bind you. It never could have. Nadia sat with this information. It moved through her slowly, the way warmth moved through someone who had been cold for a very long time, not immediately but in layers. The outside first, and then deeper, and deeper still, until it reached something she had been keeping very carefully insulated. She did not cry. She had learned not to cry in front of anyone a long time ago. But she pressed her lips together and looked at the surface of the table for a moment, and when she looked up again, she thought, from the quality of his stillness, that he had given her that moment deliberately. What happens now? She said. To him. He will leave my property tonight, Aldrich said. He will not return. Beyond that, he paused. That is a decision for other people and other institutions. Not mine to make. She understood what he was not saying. He was not saying, I will handle this. He was not saying, leave it to me. He was giving her the agency she had been given so little of, pressing it back into her hands with both of his, and waiting to see what she did with it. She appreciated that more than she could have articulated. I don't have anywhere to go tonight, she said. She said it plainly, without apology, because she was tired of apologizing for the facts of her situation. He took most of the money. The account I had access to, he closed it 3 weeks ago. I have my phone and the clothes I'm wearing, and you may stay here tonight, Aldrich said. As long as you need to. He said it with the same lack of inflection he seemed to apply to most statements of significant consequence, as though the size of a thing was not a reason to alter your voice around it. There are guest rooms. Sarah will show you. Nadia looked at him. Why? She said. You don't know me. He considered this seriously. The way she was beginning to understand, he considered most things. You hid under my dinner table for 40 minutes, he said. And when you came out, you sat down and had a conversation instead of running. He met her eyes. I find I would like to know you better. Outside, somewhere in the east wing, she could hear the muffled sound of Marcus arguing with someone. The sound was getting no closer. It was, in fact, very slowly getting further away. The tea in her cup was still warm. She slept in a room that was larger than the apartment she and Marcus had shared before he had decided they needed a house that demonstrated things, and she slept deeply and without dreaming, which was unusual. She generally dreamed in those years. The dreams were not nightmares exactly, they were more like weather systems, pressure fronts moving across a flat gray interior landscape, leaving a residue of unease that she carried into her mornings without quite knowing why. This morning she woke to pale winter light, coming through curtains she did not recognize in a room that smelled of old wood and clean stone, and her first coherent thought was, Marcus is not here. Her second thought was, and I am not leaving to fix that. She lay still for a long moment, taking inventory of herself the way she had learned to take inventory each morning, checking for damage, cataloging the night before, determining what the new day required. Her knees ached from the marble. Her left wrist, the old bruise, was tender in the way old bruises were when the weather was cold. She was hungry, which felt like a remarkable and almost cheerful discovery. Hunger implied a body that expected to eat, a future that expected to contain a meal. Nadia had spent months not being hungry because hunger implied future, and she had not been able to afford future as a concept. She showered in a bathroom that had clearly been used recently, and recently before that, and recently before that, a comfortable continuity of use, and dressed in the clothes she had worn the night before because they were all she had, and went downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen, which was large and stone-floored and more functional than the rest of the house, and she was making coffee in the particular focused way of someone who took coffee seriously and appreciated being allowed to focus on it. She looked up when Nadia came in and indicated, without words, a chair at the kitchen table and a cup waiting on the counter. Your husband left at 4 a.m, Sarah said, returning to the coffee. He made an additional request before departing. Nadia sat down. She wrapped her hands around the cup. What kind of request? He asked for a meeting with my lord within the week, to renegotiate terms. She absorbed this. The cold was not in the marble this time, just in the fact of it, the persistence of Marcus, the way he moved through the world with the absolute conviction that there was always another conversation, always another angle, always a deal to be made if you kept talking long enough. He had proposed to her 4 times before she said yes, and she had not understood at the time that this was not romance, but strategy. What did your lord say? He said no, Sarah replied, with a precision that told Nadia this was an exact quote and that no additional words had accompanied it. She almost smiled. She stopped it before it fully formed, but the impulse was there, which was itself interesting. Sarah set the finished coffee on the table and sat across from her with her own cup, and there was something in the gesture, the sitting down, the cup between them, the deliberate informality that felt like an invitation to speak plainly. He's going to keep trying, Nadia said. Marcus. He doesn't stop. Sarah nodded once, neither dismissing this nor catastrophizing it. He is a persistent man. She sipped her coffee. It is a quality that serves certain kinds of ambition very well. She paused. Less well when the thing you are trying to obtain has decided it is not obtainable. Nadia looked at her. He used a seal. In the contract. My Aldrich said it was dissolved a long time ago. Does Marcus know that? Sarah's expression was thoughtful. I believe, she said carefully, that Marcus knows enough to have recognized the seal's historical weight without knowing enough to understand its current status. He found the compact in old records and believed it gave him a lever. She set her cup down. Men like your husband are very good at finding levers, less good at confirming whether the mechanisms they are attached to still function. Nadia thought about this. 4 years of living with Marcus had given her a very precise understanding of the way he reasoned the confident gaps, the places where he assumed that possession of a partial truth constituted mastery of the whole subject. He had done it with money, with relationships, with the law. Apparently, he had done it with vampires. She looked up. "Is that what he is?" she said. Aldrich, she was aware this was a question she should perhaps have asked before spending the night in the house. Sarah's expression did not change, but something behind it settled into a mild amusement. "Did you need to be told?" "No," Nadia said honestly. "I didn't." The thing she had known beneath the table without knowing she knew it, the smell of cold stone and deep water and iron, the quality of the voice that made other sounds step back, the absolute stillness that was not a performance of stillness, but its natural state, she had known all of it. She had catalogued it in the part of her that ran ahead of conscious thought, and filed things under instinct rather than analysis. She had stayed anyway. She was trying to understand why. 4 years of marriage to a man who had systematically removed from her life every circumstance that did not require his permission had left her with a set of instincts she did not entirely trust. She had learned to doubt her own judgment the way she had learned to doubt her own memory carefully, thoroughly, from the inside out. When her instincts said something was safe, she now ran it through a second and third check, looking for the place where she was wrong, where she was wishful, where survival was dressing itself up as something more. But underneath the table, in the 40 minutes before she had come out, she had run the check. And the check had come back. He knew you were there and said nothing. He addressed Marcus without making you a bargaining point. He gave you time and space and tea and a room with a lock on the door. She had tested the lock before she slept. It worked from the inside. Aldrich was in the library when she found him, standing at a window that looked out over the winter gardens, his hands behind his back, his posture the same quality of settled permanence she had observed the night before. He did not turn when she came in, but she had the impression he had known she was approaching before she had decided to approach. She stopped a few feet inside the doorway. "I need to call a solicitor," she said, "to start the legal process. For the marriage." He turned then. His pewter eyes were the same in morning light, steady and deep, and carrying that quality of attention she had not yet found a word for. He nodded once. "Sarah can recommend someone," he said. "Someone not connected to any of Marcus's network." She appreciated that he understood that this was a consideration. She stood in the doorway and he stood at the window, and between them the morning light lay across the library floor in long winter bars, and she thought about the contract with her name at the top, and the seal that meant nothing, and she thought about a man who had not moved his chair for 3 hours. "Thank you," she said, "for last night." He looked at her in his quiet way. "You did not require rescuing," he said. "You had already rescued yourself before you came through the door." She thought about the document in his jacket lining, the 3 days of carrying it, the moment in the car when she had decided she was not going to do this. "Maybe," she said. He almost smiled. The corners of his mouth moved a fraction, just enough to suggest that somewhere in there a smile existed, and had decided to make a brief appearance. "There is breakfast," he said, "if you would like it." She stayed 3 days. Then, 3 more. She told herself it was practical. The solicitor Sarah had recommended was in the city and required documents Nadia did not have immediate access to, and accessing them meant contacting people who were part of the life she was ending, which required the kind of careful preparation that could not be rushed. This was all true. It was also not the whole truth, but the partial truth was sufficient for the first week. By the second week, she had stopped looking for reasons. The estate had a rhythm that was unlike anything she had lived inside before. Not the performed tidiness of her married life with Marcus, where order was a statement and disorder was a threat, but something more organic, the rhythm of a place that had been inhabited for a very long time by someone who had found their own tempo and saw no reason to alter it. Things happened at particular hours, not because of scheduling, but because they had always happened at those hours, and the house had organized itself around them the way water organized itself around stone. Aldrich rose before dawn. She knew this because she was also awake before dawn now, and on the third morning she had come downstairs at 5 and found him already in the kitchen with his coffee, reading something in a language she didn't recognize from a book that looked like it had not been available in shops for several centuries. He had looked up, said nothing, pushed the second cup toward her. This became a pattern. They did not talk much in those early mornings. She found, to her surprise, that this was not uncomfortable. She had spent 4 years inside a marriage where silence was never neutral. It was always either demanded or punished, always weighted with what was not being said. Silence with Aldrich was different. It was simply silence. The absence of noise, not the presence of something unspoken. She was learning to relax inside it. During the days, she worked with the solicitor by phone and email, building the architecture of her departure from a marriage that had been, she now understood, a structure with no exits intentionally designed into it. Marcus had been thorough. The money was complicated. The house was mortgaged against debts she had not known existed. The accounts had been closed and redirected. She was not surprised. Exactly, she had understood in her bones what she was dealing with, but seeing it laid out in the solicitor's careful language was different from understanding it in the body, and she moved through those first days of legal clarity with a heaviness that was not despair, but the specific exhaustion of being proven right about something you had desperately wanted to be wrong about. Aldrich did not ask about the process. He asked, occasionally, if she needed anything. Resources, contacts, information. He offered these things the way he offered everything, plainly, without theater, with no suggestion that the offer created an obligation in the direction of gratitude or dependence. When she needed something, she said so. When he provided it, she said thank you. They were very clear with each other in this way, which was the cleanest form of interaction she had engaged in with another person in years, and it had a quality she could not name, but recognized the quality of being treated as someone with full and reliable ownership of herself. On the 6th evening, she found him in the gallery on the 2nd floor, standing before a portrait that covered most of one wall. The subject was a woman in the fashion of several centuries ago, dark-haired and formally composed, with the same pewter eyes. She stood with her hands at her sides in a posture that suggested she had been asked to be still and had consented, but on her own terms. "Your wife?" Nadia asked. He looked at the portrait with an expression she was still learning to read. It was always the same quality of containment, but the things being contained varied, and she was getting better at distinguishing between them. This one had the weight of something very old and mostly resolved. "Yes," he said, "a long time ago." She looked at the painted woman. She looked like someone who knew her own mind. "She did," he said. He glanced at Nadia. "You have the same quality." She was not sure what to do with this, so she looked at the portrait for a moment in silence. "What happened to her?" she said, and immediately added, "You don't have to tell me." "She died," he said, "as humans do." His voice was entirely level. She did not become, he paused, as I am. She did not want that. I respected her choice. Nadia absorbed this. "How long ago?" He considered. 300 years, roughly. Time becomes approximate at a certain point. He looked at the portrait. She has been gone longer than she was here. She did not say I'm sorry. She said, instead, she sounds like she was worth it. The time. All of it. He turned to look at her. Something shifted in his expression, not the fraction of a smile from the library. Something more complex. Something that had been very still for a very long time and was considering, very carefully, whether to move. "She was," he said. They stood in the gallery in the winter dark, and Nadia thought about worth and time and what it meant to choose someone, and she thought about how long it had been since she had stood near someone and felt genuinely safe. She thought about the lock on her door, testing it from the inside, the simple extraordinary fact of it working. "I should tell you something," she said. He waited. "When I was under the table, after you spoke to Marcus, and Sarah left, and it was quiet, I almost came out then. Right away." She paused. "But I didn't, because I thought, he's going to want something now. Whatever he did just now, there's going to be a price. And I waited for you to say what it was." His expression did not change, but she felt something happen in the space between them, a quality of attention that intensified without becoming pressure. "And you waited 3 hours," she continued, "and you never said it. And when I finally came out, you gave me tea and a room with a working lock, and this morning you pushed the coffee cup across without asking anything." She looked at him steadily. "I want to understand what that is," she said. "Because I'm not in a position to understand it intuitively right now. I need to hear it in plain words." He looked at her for a moment. "It is this," he said. "You have had enough people deciding what you are worth and what they are owed for it." He was quiet for a beat. "I am not interested in being another one of those people." Marcus came on a Tuesday. She had not been told he was coming, and she suspected this was because no one had known, because Marcus's particular skill was identifying the margins of arrangements and stepping through them before the arrangement had time to adjust. He arrived at the gate at midday, when Aldrich was in the East Wing in what Sarah had described simply as a meeting, which Nadia had learned could mean any number of things involving people who moved through the house without quite appearing, and conversations that happened in rooms she did not walk past. She was in the library when Sarah came to find her. "He is at the gate," Sarah said. "He does not have an appointment." She paused. "You are not required to see him. You are not required to do anything you do not want to do." Nadia had known this moment was coming in the way you knew weather was coming, not the exact time and form, but the general fact, the pressure drop, the change in the quality of the air. She had been in the house for 11 days. 11 days of coffee before dawn, and working lunches with the solicitor and evenings that ended in the library or the gallery or once in the gardens despite the cold, because she had needed to be outside, and the estate's gardens were extraordinary even in winter, all clean geometry and frost-edged stone. She had also been 11 days of slowly, imperfectly, beginning to remember the dimensions of herself, not the dimensions Marcus had decided upon, the ones that had always been hers, the ones she had arrived at before he had started the project of revision. She told Sarah, "I'll see him." They met in the front drawing room, which was not the most comfortable room in the house, but was the most formal, which she had chosen deliberately. Marcus walked in looking like himself, the good coat, the particular management of his posture that communicated expensive ease. The expression of a man who had decided the best approach was warm reasonableness. He had used warm reasonableness on her many times. She knew exactly how much it weighed. He looked around the room, then at her. "You look well," he said. "Thank you," she said. She did not say the same to him. He sat without being invited to, which was also himself. Nadia remained standing, which surprised her. She had expected to sit, had expected the old reflex of making herself smaller, lower, less threatening. She stood. The surprise passed. "This has gone far enough," Marcus said. His voice was still warm, still reasonable. "Nadia, you know me. You know us. Whatever happened, whatever you think happened, we can fix it." He leaned forward slightly. "I made a mistake, I see that. The document was a business decision made in a difficult moment. It wasn't about you. It had her name on it," she said. He smiled, "The functional kind. You know what I mean." "I do," she said. "That's the problem." He studied her. Something shifted in his expression. A small and very familiar shift, the place where warm reasonableness ran out of runway, and the next register began to load. She had seen it so many times that she could feel it in her own body. An old muscle memory, the preparations beginning. Make yourself smaller. Anticipate. Start the calculations. She noticed herself doing it, and then, with a clarity that was almost physical, she stopped. She stood in the drawing room of a house that was not hers, in clothes that were now 4 days old because she had ordered new ones but they had not arrived yet. 11 days out of a life she had lived for 4 years, and she stopped doing the things she had always done. She let the calculation run, and she looked at it, and she decided not to follow it. The silence stretched. Marcus filled it the way he always filled silences that went longer than he expected, by reaching for a larger instrument. His voice dropped. "Do you know what you're doing?" "Staying here with," he gestured around the room, and the gesture was dismissive in a very specific way, the way you gestured at things that should not need to be taken seriously. "These people. You know what they are." She met his eyes. "Yes, and you're comfortable with that. More comfortable than I was with what I knew you were," she said. Something moved across his face, not the managed shifts she was used to, reading something less composed, something that had been waiting under all the registers for a moment of sufficient provocation to emerge. She saw it, and felt nothing, which was interesting. She had spent 4 years trying to prevent that expression, building her behavior around the prevention of it, and now that it was here, now that it had arrived, she felt nothing but a kind of flat, exhausted clarity. The door of the drawing room opened. Not with urgency. Aldrich did not move with urgency, she had observed, the way people who had never needed to rush had simply removed the setting, but with the same quiet inevitability she had come to associate with him. He came in, took in the room, took in Marcus, and stopped beside Nadia. Not in front of her. Beside her. He looked at Marcus without particular expression. "Your car is at the gate," he said. "The gate will remain open for 15 minutes. Marcus stood. He looked at Aldrich. He looked at Nadia. His jaw was set with everything he was choosing not to say, which was, she suspected, quite a lot. "This isn't finished," he said. Aldrich considered this with the same attention he gave everything. "No," he said, "but you are finished here." Marcus left. She heard the front door. She heard, some minutes later, the car on the gravel drive. She stood in the drawing room with Aldrich beside her, and she did not feel triumphant or relieved or any of the things she had thought she might feel when this moment finally came. She felt tired in a clean way, the tiredness of something that had been holding a weight, setting it down at last. She became aware that Aldrich was watching her. "Are you all right?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." The night after Marcus left, she could not sleep. Not from fear this time, she checked, and it was not fear, which was notable enough that she noted it. It was something else, something with more energy in it than fear, something that moved in the chest rather than sitting heavy in the stomach. She lay in the room with the working lock and stared at the ceiling, and eventually, at 2 a.m, accepted that the ceiling was not going to resolve this for her, and got up. She went to the kitchen, started coffee, sat in the chair that had become, over 11 days, her chair, in the way that things in places you inhabit for long enough quietly become yours without formal arrangement. Aldrich came down at 2:45. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. He sat. Neither of them said anything for a while. "I keep thinking about the document," she said eventually. "Not its legal status. Just the fact of it, that he wrote it, that he found that seal and used it because he thought she stopped, because he thought I was that kind of thing, something transferable." Aldrich was quiet. "I knew," she said. "I knew what the marriage was. I think I knew within the first year." She wrapped her hands around her cup, but knowing, and she searched for the word accommodating. They're different things. I got very good at accommodation. She looked at the cup. I'm not sure what I'm like without it. You are like this, Aldrich said. She looked up. He was looking at her steadily. You are like someone who hides under tables instead of getting into cars, who carries documents inside her clothing for 3 days while working out what to do, who gets up at 2 in the morning when she cannot sleep and makes coffee and sits with the question instead of away from it. She considered this. That's a generous reading, she said. It is an accurate one, he said. I have had some time to observe. She almost laughed. You've had 12 days. He looked at her with that quality she had spent 12 days trying to find the right word for, and she thought she finally had it. It was the quality of being seen by someone who was not looking for anything particular and was therefore able to see clearly, not looking for confirmation of an existing theory, not looking for a reflection of themselves, not looking for leverage or weakness or any of the things that looking at another person was usually in service of. Just looking. I have also, he said, had some experience with people in general. The understatement of the 12 days, she said, and this time she did laugh, a small and slightly surprised laugh that felt like finding something in a coat pocket you had forgotten you had. He almost smiled, that margin of almost smile. She looked at him in the kitchen light and thought about 300 years and a woman who had known her own mind. She thought about a man who had sat very still for 40 minutes because a frightened person needed time before they needed answers. She thought about the kind of patience that was not strategy, but nature, that came from being old enough to understand the difference between things that required action and things that required only presence. What was her name? She said. Your wife. He looked at the table briefly. Elara, he said. She waited to see if there was more. There was. She was a physician, he said. When women were not permitted to be physicians, she was one anyway. She found methods. She found a way. He was quiet for a moment. She would have found the document in Marcus's coat within the first week, and she would have left immediately with considerably less hesitation. Nadia considered this. Was that a comparison? Possibly, he said. You lasted 4 years. I stayed, she said. That's not the same as lacking the ability to leave. I know, he said. I am not judging the staying. I am observing the leaving. She looked at him. Why does the leaving matter to you? He was quiet for a moment. That was not evasion, but the genuine search for precision. Because, he said, I have watched a great many people remain in circumstances that diminished them, because the capacity to leave to look at something that is not right and decide that the fact of its established presence is not sufficient reason to endure it is one I have found remarkable each time I have observed it. He met her eyes. And because you did it here. In this house. Where I was able to see it, the kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind had come up and was moving through the winter gardens with a sound like paper. She thought about what he was saying and what he was not saying, and the distance between them and what it would take to close it. She thought about Elara, 300 years gone, who had known her own mind. She thought, I know my mind too. I am simply relearning where it lives. She wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at him across the kitchen table and said, very plainly, I am not ready yet. For whatever this is that is happening between us, I need more time. He nodded. He said it so simply that the word had no underside. All right, no conditions, she said. No timeline. None, he said. She looked at him. You're very easy to be around, she said. It's disconcerting. I have been told, he said, that I become easier with familiarity. She thought about that for a moment. Is that an argument for familiarity? She said. He looked at her with the almost smile. It is a fact, he said. What you do with it is entirely your own decision. She finished her coffee. He finished his. Outside, the wind moved through the frost-edged gardens, and the house settled around them with the comfortable creaking of something that had been standing for a very long time and intended to continue standing. She went back to bed at 4. She slept without dreaming. The divorce took 4 months. Marcus contested it, because Marcus contested everything as a matter of principle, and because contesting gave him a reason to make contact, and contact gave him a reason to speak, and speaking, for Marcus, was another form of control. Nadia had expected this. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything now, methodically, without drama, working through the steps with the solicitor Sarah had recommended, who turned out to be excellent and entirely unintimidated by Marcus's team of lawyers, which she suspected was partly professional competence and partly the knowledge of who her client was staying with. She did not stay at the estate for all 4 months. She went to London for 6 weeks to deal with the legal requirements of physical presence, staying in a small flat in the north of the city that she rented with money from an account Marcus had not known about because she had opened it 8 months ago when she was still in the marriage and had begun, very quietly, to prepare a door. The solicitor had helped her access it. She called Aldrich once a week, at no particular time. These calls were short and clear. He asked how the process was progressing. She told him. He asked once if she needed anything. She thought about it seriously and said, "No, I have what I need, but thank you." He said, "Good." The calls ended when the conversation ended, which was different from other calls she had in that period, calls with her sister, who she had reconnected with and who needed to talk through her feelings about everything for long stretches. Calls with the solicitor that had the compressed urgency of professional time. Calls with friends she was remembering how to have, which were warm but slightly effortful in the way of things that had been out of practice. The calls with Aldrich required nothing but the conversation. She found herself looking forward to them in the same quiet way she had found herself looking forward to the early mornings in the kitchen, not with the sharp urgency of want, but with the calm satisfaction of something reliable. Something that was where she expected it to be when she arrived. She came back to the estate in early spring, not because the divorce was finalized, it wasn't yet, but because London had done what it needed to do, and she was ready to be somewhere with better light. This was how she explained it to her sister, who had raised her eyebrows and said nothing, which meant she understood. The estate in spring was different from the estate in winter. The gardens had moved from frost-edged geometry to something softer, more deliberate, with the first of the flowers opening in the borders and the trees in the orchard showing pale green at their tips. She stood in the drive when she arrived and looked at it and thought, "I missed this." She had not expected to. She had expected to miss the concept of a place, and not the specific place, because she had learned to hold specific places loosely, not to attach to them, not to need them, because needing things that could be taken was a form of vulnerability that Marcus had taught her, over time, to avoid. But she had missed this specific garden, this specific stone, this specific quality of light through old windows. Aldrich met her at the door. Not with ceremony, he opened it before she reached it and stood back to let her through, and then stood near her in the entrance hall in the way he had stood near her in the drawing room when Marcus was there. Beside her. Not in front. "You look well," he said. "Better than the last time someone said that to me," she said. He almost smiled. Sarah was in the kitchen. There was dinner. The evening settled around her with the ease of something that already knew her shape, and she thought, "This is what it is to return to something. I have not returned to somewhere in a very long time." Over the weeks that followed, things shifted between them in the way that things shifted when you stopped watching for the shift and let it happen in its own time. Not dramatically, there was no moment of sudden declaration, no scene in the rain, no single crystalline instant that could be pointed to later as the one where everything changed. It was instead a long series of small things, each one quiet enough to be deniable, and together amounting to something unmistakable. He walked with her in the gardens in the evenings. She learned the names of things she had always looked at without naming. He had been learning for centuries and had the patience for instruction of someone who remembered exactly what not knowing felt like. She asked questions, and he answered them, and the answers were never condescending, which she appreciated in a specific and particular way that had to do with who she had recently been to someone else. She told him about Prague, which she had left at 11, and which she remembered in fragments: the cobblestones, the winter light on the river, the smell of her grandmother's kitchen. He had been in Prague in a different century, and described it with the warmth of someone who had loved a city long enough to know all its moods. She listened to him talk, and thought about what it was to carry that much time and memory, and continue to find things in the world worth paying attention to. She thought this was perhaps the thing she admired most about him. Not the power was common enough among the people who had moved through her life, and she had learned to be unimpressed by it. Not even the patience, though that was rarer. It was the attention. The way nothing she said was too small for his full consideration. The way he was present in the actual moment, rather than in the moment's usefulness to some future moment he was moving toward. She had spent 4 years with someone who was always somewhere ahead of the present, planning, angling, building the next level of the structure. It had made her feel like scenery. Aldrich made her feel like the room. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in June. The solicitor called her at 9 in the morning and read her the relevant portions, and she sat in the garden on a stone bench in the early summer light and listened. And when the call ended, she sat for a while longer, with her phone in her lap and the sound of the birds in the orchard, and thought, done. Aldrich found her there an hour later. He sat beside her on the bench, which was large enough for 2 if they sat closely, and looked out at the garden. "It is done," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at his profile, the clean lines, the settled gravity, all that depth and time and patience organized into a person who had chosen to be beside her on a bench in a garden on a Thursday morning. She thought about Alara, who had known her own mind. She thought, so do I. I would like to try, she said. This, whatever we are. He turned to look at her. So would I, he said. He said it with the same plain clarity he gave to everything, the same absence of theater, the same exactness. Then he said, I should tell you what that means, what I am, what the duration of things could be. You should understand fully what you are agreeing to. I know what you are, she said. You know the word, he said gently. There is more to know than the word. Then tell me, she said. I'm not in a hurry. He almost smiled, and this time it went further than almost it completed itself. Quietly, at the corners of his eyes and the edge of his mouth, and she understood that this was rare, and felt the specific warmth of things that were rare and had been given to her. I have, he said, a considerable amount of time in which to tell you. She leaned back against the bench. Good, she said. Start anywhere. She learned things in stages. The way you learned things about people, not in a single scheduled disclosure, but in the continuous accumulation of ordinary moments that turned out to contain information. She learned that he did not sleep in the way she slept. He rested long periods of profound stillness that served the function of sleep without its vulnerability, and during the night hours when she sometimes woke and lay listening to the house, she would become aware of him somewhere in its depths, present and awake in the way old houses were present and awake, a quality of inhabited watchfulness that she found, to her own surprise, settling rather than unsettling. She learned that he ate, though not frequently and not as she ate food, was something he consumed out of aesthetic appreciation rather than need, which explained, she thought, why the kitchen's coffee was always extraordinary. He had several centuries to develop opinions about coffee. She had found that opinions developed over centuries tended to be both very fixed and very well founded. She learned about the court, the network of old families and older obligations that had organized itself around him over the centuries. that required his attention in the way large and complicated things required attention. Not constantly, but with enough frequency and consequence that she could see the weight of it on his shoulders in the particular evenings when he came back from meetings that had gone long. She had recognized the shape of that weight. She had seen it before. On one of those evenings, she found him in the library standing at the window with his hands behind his back in the posture she associated with whatever he did when he needed to be somewhere without an audience. She came in and did not speak. She sat in one of the chairs by the fire. After a few minutes, he turned and looked at her. "The southern houses again," he said. She nodded. "Do you want to talk about it?" He considered. "No," he said, "but I would like you to be here." She stayed. This became a pattern too, a different one from the morning coffee pattern, the evening pattern, the one about presence rather than conversation. She had not known until she was inside it that there was this whole category of comfort she had never had access to. The comfort of someone who simply wanted you in the room, not for what you would say or do or provide, but because your being there was itself the thing that helped. Marcus had never wanted her in a room. He had wanted her performance in a room, which was different. She understood the difference now with the precision of someone who had lived both and could make the comparison directly. In August, 4 months after she had returned, and 10 months after the night under the table, she met the court. Not formally, not the presentation that Marcus had apparently been building toward. Not anything with ceremony, or thrones, or Gothic architecture designed to make a point. It was a dinner. 6 people, old families that Aldrich trusted enough to introduce in an informal setting. She dressed carefully, and was ready at the right time, and sat at a table, and had a conversation. They were curious about her in the way very old creatures were curious about things thoroughly, and without rushing the process. They asked her questions that were careful and pointed, and occasionally designed to find edges, and she answered them clearly and without apology. When one of them, a woman who looked 35 and had been alive for 6 centuries, asked her what she thought she was doing here, with him, she considered the question seriously. "I'm learning the difference," she said, "between being in a room because someone wants something from me, and being in a room because I want to be there." The woman looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Aldrich. "She has a point," she said. Aldrich said, "I know." The dinner went well. She did not think about this too much, because she had learned that thinking too much about things going well was its own form of superstition. It went well. She had been present and herself, and it had been enough. She filed this information and moved on. The seasons moved. Summer into autumn, into the beginning of winter again, the year completing its circle, and she was inside it fully now, inside the house, inside the life that had grown up around her without her noticing it grow, inside something she did not yet have a word for, but that had the quality of permanence. Not the permanence Marcus had imposed, which was a cage calling itself a home. The other kind, the kind that came from choosing the same thing every day until the choice became nature. She was choosing this. Every morning, she was choosing it. One evening in November, almost exactly a year since she had pressed herself flat on cold marble and held her breath and listened to the footsteps of a stranger, she was sitting in the library with a book she was not reading. And Aldrich was at his desk with something he was working through in the old language that she was learning now. Slowly, with the help of dictionaries that predated the printing press. She set the book down. "I want to tell you something," she said. He looked up. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, because she had decided she was going to say this clearly, without circling it or softening it or packaging it in the protective material of humor or qualification. "I have been thinking about what you told me. In the summer. About duration. About what you are, and what it would mean." He was very still. "I have been thinking about it seriously," she said. Not quickly. Not because of anything except because I wanted to understand what I was considering before I said anything about it. He waited. I am not ready to make a decision about that, she said. About duration, about transformation, I need more time. I don't know how much. She met his eyes. But I want you to know that I am considering it, that I am not. She searched for the word, not avoiding it, not refusing to look at it. I'm looking directly at it and taking my time. Something in his expression moved that slow, deep movement she had come to know, the movement of things that did not surface quickly, but when they surfaced completely. That is all I would ask, he said. She nodded. Also, she said, I am in love with you. She said it the same way she said most things now plainly, with the knowledge of exactly what she was saying. I thought you should know. Since we're being clear about things. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. Then, with the complete quiet honesty that had been the first thing she had truly learned about him, I have been in love with you since approximately the second week. She thought about the second week. The kitchen in the mornings. The drawing room and Marcus and the word no, delivered without theater and without aftermath. Only the second week, she said. He looked at her steadily. I was being conservative. She looked at him across the library in the winter light, all that depth and time and patience organized into someone who had waited very still while she found her way back to herself. And she thought about a document with her name at the top, and how long ago it seemed now, how entirely different the life it had been trying to define her into was from the life she was currently living. She thought about a working lock on a door, tested from the inside. She got up from her chair. She crossed the library. She sat on the edge of his desk and looked down at him. You are, she said, the most patient person I have ever met. I have had practice, he said. She leaned down and kissed him. His hands came up to her face, cool and steady and careful. The same quality as everything else about him. The same patience translated into touch. She kissed him with the full weight of a year behind it, and when she pulled back, his eyes were open and very still and the color of deep water. I know, she said. You're going to say you have 300 years of experience as context. No, he said. His voice was slightly different, quieter, rougher at the edges, in a way she had not heard before and found she very much wanted to hear again. I was going to say, he said, that nothing I have experienced in any of those years has felt quite like this. She made the decision in January, not dramatically, not after a single conversation or a particular event that tipped the balance, but after a very long process of looking at it from every angle, the way she made decisions now, the way she had learned to trust her own process again. She made lists that she wrote in a notebook and looked at over several mornings. She talked to Sarah, who was both the most honest person she had access to and the most useful, having navigated a version of this question herself in a different century and a different context. She talked to her sister, who did not fully understand but tried, and whose trying mattered more than her understanding. She thought about Alara, who had chosen not to. She did not think this was the wrong choice. She thought it was Alara's choice, made from Alara's understanding of herself, and that the rightness of it was entirely specific to Alara. She was not Alara. She was someone else. She thought about what she had been a year ago, pressed flat on cold marble with her heart hammering, and her whole body organized around the project of invisibility, and she thought about what she was now, and about the distance between those two people, and she thought, the woman I was a year ago made choices I don't regret. She found a door when there was no door. She kept a document inside her clothing for 3 days. She crawled out from under a table and sat down in a chair and said, My name is Nadia. She could trust that woman's judgment. She had earned the right to be trusted. She told Aldrich on a Sunday evening in the library, in the same chairs where she had told him she loved him, because it seemed right to have these conversations in the same place. I've decided, she said. I want this, the future you described. He looked at her for a long moment. The quality of the look was one she recognized, the look of someone making absolutely certain that what they were seeing was real and not what they wanted to see instead of real. "You are certain," he said. Not a question, but checking. "I'm certain," she said. "Not because I'm not afraid. I am afraid." She held his gaze. "But I've learned the difference between afraid and wrong. This isn't wrong. This is just large." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, the process is not as you said. Small, I know. Sarah told me. And you are still certain." She thought about the cold marble and the document and the working lock. She thought about a year of choosing every day. She thought about coffee before dawn and library evenings, and his hands on her face when she kissed him, and the way the house felt when she came back to it, the way it knew her shape. "Yes," she said. He nodded once, and something in his face settled in a way it did not usually settle, or rather in a way that was different from its usual settled quality. This was not the stillness of patience, but the stillness of relief. And she had not fully understood until this moment how long he had been carrying the weight of not knowing. She reached across and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. His grip was steady and cool, and she felt the bond between them, not yet the formal bond she was agreeing to, but the one that had been building for a year in coffee cups and garden walks and evenings in the library, and all the small, ordinary accumulation of two people who had chosen the same direction and kept walking. "There is time," he said. "No hurry." "I know," she said. "That's one of the things I like best about this." She leaned her head back against the chair and looked at the library ceiling, all that old stone and shadow, and thought about duration. A year ago she could not afford the concept of future. Now she was considering something that made future into a different kind of word entirely, not the anxious forward-looking of someone waiting for the next thing to go wrong, but something vast and open and full of possibility. 1,000 years of getting to keep choosing. 1,000 years of mornings and coffee and library evenings, and someone who wanted her in the room. She was afraid of it. She held the fear and looked at it clearly. She was also, underneath the fear, in a way she could feel in the deep part of her chest where she kept things she was sure of ready for it. Outside the library windows, the January garden was bare and frost-edged, the same geometry she had first seen the night she arrived, before she understood the difference between sterile and spare, before she knew that spare could mean something was waiting to grow into it. The trees in the orchard were dark sticks against a pale sky. By spring they would be different. She had learned to trust spring. "You were right about one thing," she said. He looked at her. "You said you become easier with familiarity." He waited. "You do," she said. But also she paused, finding the right shape for it. "You become more. The more familiar, the more you are. Most people become less. You keep getting to be more." He looked at her in the quiet way he had, and she watched the almost smile arrive and complete itself, and stay longer than it usually stayed. "I could say the same of you," he said. She thought about the woman under the table, and the woman in this chair, and the long, complicated distance between them, and everything that had happened in that distance. And she thought, "Yes, that is what I have been doing this whole time. Becoming more." She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. The library was warm, and the winter was outside where it belonged, and somewhere in the estate the old house was going through its familiar evening rhythms, its comfortable creaking and settling, the language of a place that had been lived in for a very long time, and expected to continue. She fit inside it now. She could feel the way she fit, the specific shape of the space that had grown around her over the course of a year, shaped by her presence, shaped by her choosing to stay. She thought about 40 minutes on cold marble, listening to measured footsteps and breathing in the smell of cold stone and deep water. She thought about the amber sliver of light and the shoes that did not move. She thought about crawling out and sitting down and the extraordinary luxury of a cup of tea placed between two people with no condition attached. She had found the door when there was no door. Everything since had been walking through it. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, the frost deepened, and the bare trees held their ground, and the January stars appeared, one by one, through the long windows of the house. Aldrich's hand was steady in hers. She was not afraid of the quiet. She had not been afraid of the quiet for a very long time. She was going to have an extraordinary amount of time. She intended to use every year of it.